Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone to Bilingualism. This is our first class of this course, and today's topic is Introduction to Bilingualism. We will be talking about the introduction of bilingualism, its definition. We'll see how common is bilingualism and what are its types. As you can see on the right side of the screen, that there are quite a few types of bilingualism, in which you see coordinate and compound bilingualism, simultaneous and successive bilingualism, additive and subtractive bilingualism, elite and folk bilingualism, and balanced bilingualism. So let's see them one by one. First we will start with the introduction, of course. Bilingualism, or more generally multilingualism, is the phenomena of speaking and understanding two or more languages. So this is a phenomena of speaking or understanding two languages or more than two languages. So it can refer to the individual bilingualism, as well as to an entire society that can be called social bilingualism. So this term can also refer to the corresponding scientific research which studies the phenomena itself. So there are quite a few terms that can be used as synonymous for the same phenomena of bilingualism, including bilingualism, multilingualism, and polyglottism. So these three terms, they can be referred to bilingualism. Bilingualism is the ability of an individual person or the member of a community to use two languages effectively. Monolingualism refers to the ability to use a single language. Monolingualism is the ability to use a single language, and the ability to use multiple languages is known as multilingualism. So here we got three different types, in the first one is the ability to use two languages, which is called as bilingualism, and ability to use single language will be called monolingualism, and ability to use multiple languages, more than two languages, will be known as multilingualism. So here we have quite useful information down there. You can see here more than half of the world's population is bilingual or multilingual. You can see that more than half of the world's population. So I think at this time maybe the population is about maybe 7 billion people. So half of the world's population is bilingual or multilingual. So according to a multimedia encyclopedia from the US, so this data that 56% of Europeans are bilingual, while 38% of population in Great Britain and 35% in Canada and 17% in the United States are bilingual. So where did this term come from, bilingualism? So it came from Latin. Bi means two, and Lingualism refers to tongue, so it means two tongues, two languages. So let's see its definitions. How easy or difficult to define this phenomena. Uh, it is not easy to formulate a generally accepted definition of bilingualism. So that's for clear. That's for sure. It's not easy to formulate a generally, that everyone or everybody is acceptable for everyone. It's very difficult to formulate such a definition of bilingualism. Bilingualism means different things to different people. For example, you see number one here, Bloomfield, he defined bilingualism as native-like control of two languages. So Bloomfield defined as that native-like control of two languages. If anybody who has native-like control on two languages, so according to Bloomfield, he can be classified as a bilingual person. But this definition is excluding many people who speak more than one language but do not have native-like control of one or both of their languages. So there are countless people, many people who speak different languages but not up to the native standard. For example, we people in Pakistan also we speak English but not up to the native-like standard of English. So in this way, we are also excluded from the domain of bilingualism. So it's quite obvious that Bloomfield's definition of bilingualism needs to be modified. It needs to be changed if it is to reflect accurately the reality of people's ability to use languages. So the reality is different, okay? So and this definition is not reflecting the reality of people's ability to use languages. So definitely this definition needs to be modified. So who will dare to modify it? I don't know. So maybe one of you scholars. So a question arises here, the existence of large number, as I said, of people who speak more than one language, but they do not exhibit native-like control in both languages. So this raises a question of how proficient a person must be to be classed as bilingual. He says, that there are many people who speak more than one language, but they do not exhibit native-like control. So what should be the standard of proficiency of the language that a person can be classed as bilingual? So there are answers as well. Hogan suggests that bilingualism begins at the point where a speaker of one language can produce complete meaningful utterances in the other language. So here, you can see a sigh of relief for us. Hogan suggests that bilingualism begins at the point where a speaker of one language can produce complete meaningful utterances in the other language. So my language is Urdu. If I can produce complete meaningful utterances in Arabic or in English, so it means, so Hogan is including me into the bilingualism domain. And Diebold, as he's one step down than Hogan, okay, he's even more flexible. Let's see what he says. Dipole in 1961 has even suggested that bilingualism has commenced when a person begins to understand utterances in a second language but is unable to produce utterances. So here he is more lenient than Hagen even. So he says bilingual commence when a person begins to understand utterances in a second language but is unable to produce utterances. I mean, even if you cannot utter or even you cannot produce utterances in a second language, but you can understand, so you are bilingual according to Dipole. Are you happy now? So we are bilinguals now, of course, as per up till here. Let's see what happens next. Alright, so here what we conclude here that bilingualism may be defined as someone having some ability to use two or even more languages. So he may have some ability, okay, to use two or more languages. So if this is the case, therefore there should be degrees of bilinguality. Okay, so here we will see there are two extremes, okay, as regarding to the degrees of bilinguality. At one extreme there are those people who have native like control over two languages. So this is one extreme, that people having native like control over two languages. And at the other extreme are those people who have just begun to acquire a second language, maybe they are at the stage of just understanding the second language, or maybe they are one step further ahead, that they can produce some meaningful piece of language in second language as well. Alright, so here the question is, I mean, how can the degrees of bilingualism be assessed? So of course, I mean, the degrees of bilingualism can be assessed in the individual's command of the four language skills, which are listening, reading, speaking, writing in each language. For example, some children in immigrant communities, they have all four skills only in the official language of their country of residence, while in their parents' language they have only the oral skills of listening, comprehension and speaking. In another situation, people who are bilingual in all four skills, they can have different levels of skill in each language. For example, Vietnamese speaking child educated in English may have a better command of writing English than of written Vietnamese, even if the child's spoken Vietnamese is better than his spoken English. Okay, the Grosjean points out that we need to consider a holistic view of bilingualism. So we need an overall view of bilingualism. We should see it from all aspects, from all sides. Actually, the linguistic abilities of bilinguals have often been compared to those of monolingual speakers of the languages concerned. The bilingual, however, should not be considered as the sum total of the two complete or incomplete monolinguals. This is not fair, because the presence of two languages and their interaction in the bilingual speaker, in the bilingual person, produces a different but complete language system which responds to the individual's needs to communicate using one language or other language, or in some settings mixture of both languages. So we should not consider him as the sum total of true complete or incomplete monolingualism, because two languages in and their interaction in the bilingual person, okay, has a different system which operates differently for the needs of that individual. So now we will see how common is bilingualism. So where bilingualism isn't and where it is. Bilingualism is in most countries throughout the world. It is in all classes of society, and it is in all age groups as well. So what's left behind? Nothing. It's everywhere. Despite its presence everywhere, the importance of bilingualism in the world is not widely recognized, and particularly in countries which view themselves as monolinguals. Lewis says that bilingualism has been and is nearer to the normal situation than most people are willing to believe. So he says, so bilingual has been and is nearer to the normal situation than most people are willing to believe. So it's everywhere. It's like a normal thing now. Here we will see what are some factors that lead people to use more than one language on a regular basis. The first and most important thing is economic and social factor. So in some border areas between two language groups, economic and social factors lead many people to use more than one language on a regular basis. In Europe, people who live in a country like Belgium, they may live in Flemish-speaking area and work in French-speaking area. For such people, there is a practical need to speak both the languages of the region in which they live and the language of the region in which they work. So there is a practical need for such people to speak both of these languages. Let's see the patterns of bilingualism now, which are different in different societies. For example, countries with indigenous linguistic minorities may be bilingual, but bilingualism is normally only in the minority community. For example, native speakers of Welsh in Wales, which is in England, in Wales normally speak both Welsh and English. What I said? That native speakers of Welsh in Wales normally speak both Welsh and English. And similarly, the native speakers of Ainu in Japan usually speak Japanese as well as Ainu. But in contradiction to this, few native speakers of English speak Welsh. Not all native speakers of English speak Welsh, but few native speakers of English speak Welsh, and few native speakers of Japanese speak Ainu. So what does it show or conclude? That bilingualism is normal only in the minority community. However, in some countries bilingualism is more widespread throughout the population. For example, in Paraguay, most people speak both Spanish and Guarani. This is, by the way, a new name for myself as well, Guarani. Most people speak both these languages, Spanish and Guarani, in Paraguay. And in countries where many different languages are in contact, most people speak one or two of their neighbors' languages and often are lingua franca as well. I think this this is visible in our societies as well. I mean, we speak so many different languages in which our neighbors speak, and our lingua franca, Urdu, we also speak. Okay, and we speak our mother tongue as well. So this situation is really practical with our society as well. And in Papua New Guinea, many people living in rural areas speak two or more languages, often including a pidgin, such as Tok Pisin or Hirimoto, which is used for communicating with people over a wider area. Let's see the interrelation of immigration and bilingualism now. Immigration can also lead to the establishment of bilingual communities in the host countries. Immigrants coming from countries speaking a different language from that of the country in which they are going to settle. So they need to acquire the new language of their host country, and so they become bilingual this way, speaking both their own language and the language of the host country. They do one more thing also. So such people may in turn transmit both languages to their children and ensure the survival of the bilingual community. So how do they ensure the bilingual community? Because it's supposed to, it should be supposed that the children will automatically learn the language of the host country, but it's their parents who transmit their mother tongue to their children as well, so that their children also become bilingual. So in this way they ensure a bilingual community. They ensure the survival of the bilingual community there. So this is a typical pattern of bilingualism in Australia. According to 1986 census, 13.6% of Australians over the age of 5 speak language other than English at home. So this is a big number. So 13.6 of Australians over the age of 5, they speak a language other than English at home. Types of bilingualism. So we will see here there are 3 types of bilingualism. Actually, the study of bilingualism has tended to develop dichotomies. Among the more commonly used dichotomies are the distinctions between the following 3 sets. The first one is compound and coordinate bilingualism, 2, simultaneous and successive bilingualism, 3, elite and folk bilingualism. So all these distinctions have had an important function in drawing attention to various aspects of bilingualism, as well as they represent different approaches to the question of bilingualism. Right, the first one, coordinate and compound bilingualism. So Erwin and Osgood, they distinguish between compound and coordinate bilingualism according to the differences in cognitive functioning. So remember this. So this difference is according to the differences in cognitive functioning, how cognition functions. So this depends on this. Compound bilingualism involves two sets of linguistic signs which become associated with a single set of meaning. So compound involves two sets of linguistic signs which become associated with a single set of meaning, whereas coordinate bilingualism involves a set of translation equivalents in the two languages which correspond to two different sets of representations. So this distinction between these two types of bilingualism involves a difference in cognitive organization of linguistic material in the brain. It does not in itself indicate a difference in competence. So it involves a difference in the cognitive organization of linguistic material in the brain, not in itself indicate a difference in competence. So the coordinate bilingualism tends to be developed through an experience of different contexts in which the two languages are rarely interchanged, and whereas compound bilingualism tends to be developed through context in which the two languages are really interchanged. So the compound bilingualism tends to be developed through contexts such as formal language learning in school, or continual switching from one language to another language. Number 2, simultaneous and successive bilingualism. McLaughlin maintains that when a child learns two languages simultaneously, it is inappropriate to talk about the child's first and second languages. This is that when a child learns two languages together simultaneously, so this is not appropriate to talk about that this is the child's first language and this is second language. It doesn't apply there. Both languages are in fact first languages for him, he says. So although one may dominate in certain situations or with certain people, but anyway, for him both the languages that he has learned simultaneously are first languages for him. For McLaughlin, simultaneous bilingualism could occur at any age less than a cutoff age of 3 years. So simultaneous bilingualism can occur just before the age of 3. After 3, so 3 years is the deadline for simultaneous bilingualism, according to McLaughlin. Right. So as for McLaughlin, if a 2-year-old Portuguese-speaking child who moves to Australia and begins to acquire English would be considered to be acquiring both languages simultaneously, because he is not 3 years old yet. He is below 3. McLaughlin felt that below the age of 3, the child's first language was not yet established. That after the age of 3, the child has had considerable head start in acquiring one language and is establishing first language patterns. So this is why he considered that before the age of 3, because a child has not yet established any language, okay, foundations of any language. So before that, if he acquire two languages simultaneously or together, so he would be considered both of these languages, both of his languages would be considered as his first languages. So it can no longer be considered that a child is acquiring both languages simultaneously after the age of 3. And if after 3 years' time, when a language is acquired after the first language is established, McLaren talks of successive acquisition instead of simultaneous acquisition. So he calls it successive acquisition. So in such a case, the first and second languages can be clearly differentiated, and the added language, which is learned later on, is learned as a second language. For example, a Tagalog speaking child who moves to Australia from Philippines at the age of 4.5 will already have acquired a large amount of Tagalog as a first language. When this child exposed to English, she or he will begin learning it as a second language, because he already has established the first language, which is Tagalog. Important point here is this, that simultaneous acquisition of two languages is not necessarily superior to successive acquisition, and both the simultaneous and successive acquisition patterns of acquisition can lead to bilingual competence. And remember, a child's bilingual ability does not so much depend on how early language is introduced as on other factors such as the relative prestige of languages, cultural factors, and opportunities for use. That means that the factors such as the relative prestige of the languages, cultural factors, and opportunities for use, they can affect the bilingual ability of child, but not the factor that how early language is introduced to the child. For example, a child who acquires two languages simultaneously may lose one of those languages when contact with that language is lost, whereas a child who has acquired two languages successively but has continued contact with both languages may become balanced bilingual. Additive and subtractive bilingualism. This is the third type of bilingualism we were discussing. So Lambert drew attention to the close association between bilingualism and the social psychological mechanisms involved in language behavior. In particular, the relative social status of each of the bilingual person's languages and the person's perception of the difference in status has an important function in the development of bilingualism. Lambert distinguishes two types of bilingualism, the additive bilingualism and subtractive bilingualism. Additive bilingualism develops when both languages and culture associated with them bring complementary positive elements to the child's overall development. That means that when both languages and the culture which are associated with the culture associated with both the languages, they add something positive. They add positive elements to the child's overall development. So as a result, additive bilingualism is developed. Whereas subtractive bilingualism develops when the two languages are competing rather than complementary. So they are competing with each other, and such competitions occurs when the minority language is being replaced by the more dominant and prestigious language of the majority group. So here something is subtracted. For example, the minority language of minority group is, let's say, subtracted, and there in additive bilingualism, so some sort of positive elements are added by both the languages and the culture associated with those languages. Lambert says that the level of bilingualism achieved will reflect some stage in subtraction of the ethnic language and the associated culture and their replacement with another. So here we have example on how subtractive bilingualism occurs. So for example, when a child is educated in the more prestigious language without appropriate support for his or her home language in the education program, so in such a case subtractive bilingualism occurs. The next type is elite and folk bilingualism. Skutnap Gangas uses a distinction between elite bilinguals who acquire their second language through formal education. So the elite bilinguals, they acquired their second language, not the first one, the second language through formal education with some opportunities to use the language naturally. Whereas the folk bilinguals who acquire their second language through practical contact with speakers of that language. So this is the difference, that elite bilinguals, they acquire second language through formal education, and folk bilinguals acquired their second language through practical contact with speakers of that second language. Right, so let's see first elite bilingualism, the characteristics, the main things about elite bilingualism. Elite bilinguals typically become bilingual through a free choice to learn a language. So they have no pressure, when they are just free, they can choose to learn a second language. They are not forced by any force, any circumstances. So they are free. They become bilingual through a free choice to learn a language. Next, elite bilingualism has always been highly valued and considered a form of cultural enrichment and mark of learning and intelligence. So elite bilingualism, it has been highly valued, it is considered a form of cultural enrichment, and a mark of learning and intelligence. So they are considered very intelligent, they are considered culturally rich, and they are really valued in their society. The risk associated with failing to learn the second language in elite bilingualism domain is small, and it is equal to consequences of failing in any other area of curriculum. So it's not a big thing if somebody fails in the second language in elite bilingualism class. Students who do not excel in language studies are usually able to discontinue the area of study and concentrate their attention on other subject areas. Okay, and now now the folk bilingualism. Folk bilingualism, however, has frequently been stigmatized and has often been associated with educational controversies related to the integration of minority children into the majority society. So, as however, not the type of bilingualism or the way a language is acquired that are the cause of problems in education for folk bilingual children, but it's a combination of social and other factors. Uh, Folk bilinguals are typically members of linguistic minority groups and are subject to strong external pressure. So they are subject to strong external pressure to learn the dominant language. So as a result, they are forced by circumstances to become bilingual in their own language and in the dominant language. So they are forced. This is not their own choice to become bilingual, but it's the circumstances that push them to become bilinguals in their own language and in the dominant language of the majority to to be part of the mainstream of the society. Okay, so bilingualism is very different than the elite bilingualism. So there is a huge difference in these two types. Uh, the home language of folk bilinguals is often unvalued in the wider community, and usually it has limited or no official status. And failure to acquire the dominant language adequately can have drastic repercussions for these children. I mean, it can really affect their career. A child whose second language skills are limited is usually excluded from further educational opportunities and will be unable to compete in the labor market with children who are fluent in the dominant language, which is not the case with elite bilinguals. Okay, if they fail in the second language, I mean, they have an option. They can just switch to any other other area of learning, and it's not a big problem. But here, a folk bilingual, if he fails, okay, to acquire the second language adequately, he wouldn't be able to compete in the market, labor market, with children who are fluent in the dominant language. So it can really affect. Such a child will face restrictions on his or her access to the life of the larger community, and folk bilinguals may also suffer difficulties due to the education system's lack of support for speakers of non-dominant languages. So folk bilinguals, they may also suffer difficulties due to the education system's lack of support for speakers of non-dominant languages. I mean, if they cannot speak dominant languages, they can speak only non-dominant languages. I mean, you can see there are IELTS, TOEFL tests also. I mean, they are kind of requirement for non-dominant language speakers of non-dominant languages. So this is also one of disadvantage for the folk bilinguals. So these children frequently enter classes taught in the language they do not speak and often find themselves in the same class as native speakers of the dominant language. So these children frequently enter classes taught in the language they do not speak. So they do not speak and often find themselves in the same class as native speakers. After some times, they enter into classes of dominant language classes, and after some time, they themselves find themselves the same class as native speakers of the dominant language. So they learn language very quickly in the environment of dominant language. Moreover, for many speakers of minority languages, general education prospects for successful learning and for their acquisition of the dominant language are dependent to some extent on the continued development of their first language and of the conceptual basis they have already gained. If the education system does not assist children in this development, the result can be severe education difficulties for these children. So, if the education system does not assist children in this development, so then the results can be very bad. Okay, and there will be very much educational difficulties for these children. Alright, so the last type of bilingualism is balanced bilingualism. So let's see, balanced bilingualism has a range of meanings for different writers. So different writers believe balanced bilingualism differently. For Hogan, a balanced bilingual is an individual who has native-like competence in both languages. So he says that a balanced bilingual is an individual, is someone who has native-like competence in both languages, in the first language as well as in the second language, should have a native-like competence. More frequently, however, the term is used to refer to an individual who has roughly equal ability in both languages. But more frequently, so this term refers to someone who has roughly equal ability in both languages. Not native-like, but equal ability in both the languages. So this would mean that someone whose performance was imperfect in both languages would still be a balanced bilingual if his or her skills in each language were about the same. If your second language is not good, it means your first language should also be not good. It should, if it's good, just kidding. If it's good, so bring it to that level of your second language so that you can be included in the balanced bilingualism domain category. Most bilinguals are usually dominant in one language or the other. This is natural that most of the bilinguals, they are dominant in one language or the other instead of both, although they may not be dominant in the same language in all areas, as we saw in the example of a Vietnamese speaking child whose speaking was good in Vietnamese language, but he was better in writing in English than Vietnamese. So often there are domains of language use. So there are domains, different domains of language use. In one domain you can use this language, in another domain you can use that language. So in which people use only one of their two languages. So for example, an Arabic English bilingual, so is bilingual of Arabic and English, in Australia may use only English at work. Okay? At work he uses English only, work and school, but would normally use Arabic at home with or with friends. But at home and with friends he uses Arabic. At work and school he uses English. So as a result, this person would have a more developed vocabulary of work and school in English and a more developed vocabulary for domestic activities in Arabic. So this person could be better able to talk about work in English and better able to talk about cooking and so many things nowadays because of this isolation context in Arabic. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. So that's all. Actually, I'll send you, after a few days, I want you watch this lecture again and again, and I'll send you a PDF version of this lecture in addition to some extra material as well. Actually, the lecture was pretty long, so I just cut some of the slides down to make it a medium size. So but in PDF I will send you in complete, so we will see this and count everything that is there in that PDF. Thank you, all the best, and see you again soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And for this was the assignment for this. I mean, you will just summarize this in from 100 to 200 words. Summarize this topic. Thank you very much, and you have 1 week time for this assignment. I'll announce this on Easy Class.